Conversations in Contemporary Art is a graduate seminar based in the MFA Visiting Artist program. It provides a unique opportunity to hear dynamic and influential artists, critics, curators, and cultural workers from various domains speak. It provides seminar participants, as well as members of the public, a chance to interchange with the guests and with each other on core questions in contemporary art. Every second week, a visiting speaker will present their work in the format of a public lecture, loosely defined. I invite you to join us for these talks over the course of the fall semester in VA 114. This evening's presentation by Goa-based artist Nikhil Chopra was organized in collaboration with the FOFA Gallery and curated by Renee Bart. I'd like to thank Jennifer Dorner at the FOFA and Renee for making this happen. Amazing job. Finally, I invite the Department of Studio Arts Graduate Program Director, François Morelli, to the stage to introduce tonight's eagerly anticipated guest.
Good evening. It is really a pleasure to be here and to introduce Nikhil, the shapeshifter, the mover, the person who I saw, or I thought I saw, in India. Basically, the person who came to Montreal a couple of years ago to do some site visits and discovered Jarry Park and was enamored by a gazebo and thought that maybe one day he would come back. The person who met Renee Bart and who was trying to find funding to get this thing going, and I saw documents come by my desk, trying desperately to find money to bring him, and it was hard to do. Finally, through FOFA's hard work and the Canada Council and other funding, the evening occurs and happens. I was in Kochi when I found out it happened, southern India, in the Kerala at the biennial, in a restaurant where I had gone down to see the biennial. And apparently Nikhil was going to be there. I didn't really see him there. I saw other people, his friends, his family, his kids, walking around. I ended up going to the biennial and saw this man in a room who literally drew himself into a corner. Drew himself in the corner in terms of painting large black stripes, filling the room dark. A biennial curated by Jitish Kalat, highlighting the 15th century of southern India. Now, was Nikhil Vasco da Gama? Was Nikhil Pedro Alvarez Cabral in 1498? Or was he the Black Pearl? In any case, after 52 hours of performing, drawing nonstop, he exited, apparently, embarking on a boat and disappearing across the river. I spent 4 months in India. 3 of those weeks, I then went off to Sharjah at the biennial, yet another international biennial. This time, the past, the present, and the possible, curated by Yunji Yu, and yet again, Nikhil Chopra, again, performing. This time, Use Like Water was the title of the piece. I was anxious to meet him. But he had been in the desert for 4 days or 3 days prior to it, and by the time I walked into his installation, he was there, but this time, long-haired, bearded, and drawing on carpets, on walls, moving around silently, not really engaging at all with people, but totally in character. Basically, after 3 days again, or 2 days, he changed. He had shaved, he had stripped down, and he made a final appearance. Or apparently it was him, only this time in a dress that lit up, that was totally magical, slowly moving through the space, and yet again disappearing on a boat, crossing a river. And now apparently back in Montreal, apparently tomorrow morning exiting the FOFA Gallery at 10 in the morning on a bicycle, biking up to Paljari with people who want to join him in order to continue an installation. So I haven't seen him. I've arrived, I came in, I'm supposed to introduce someone who I've seen in various forms, various guises. And I'm sort of beside myself because That's where I'm at. Did he really get a degree from Ohio State? Did he really go to the Maryland Institute of College of Art in Baltimore? I don't know. Was it really part of the infamous Baroda School in India? Who knows? The truth of the matter, apparently, is he's in Montreal somewhere. Thank you.
Unfortunately, Nikhil Chopra is not here. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Nicholas. My friends call me Nico. Does it make any difference? I do this or I do this?
No.
Maybe it's not on. Would it be better for you to have without mic? Or, okay, Can you hear? Okay, the mic is better. Maybe you hear me clearly. Okay. So I don't like podiums. It makes me quite uncomfortable. It feels like I have half a body. Am I the fit guy to be doing this presentation? I don't know. I'm a good friend of Nikhil. My father and Nikhil's father were very good friends when they were in India together. And I've known him since he was a little child. And, you know, I've always kind of understood that he's been very interested in painting. And I would always make fun of him when we would go to a beautiful place. He would always say, "Allora, where's my sketchbook?" That sort of hobby kind of developed into a passion. The passion developed into an education. The education developed into a career. You know that. You know, I wish he was here to tell you a little bit more about some of the little details. But I try. So I cheated a little bit. I have a hard drive of all his photographs of many performances that he's done. And I decided to go into... by the way, I'm Italian. I come from a little town called Poggibonsi in Italy, in Toscana. We love truffles, tartufo, and cinghiale, which is a wild boar. But anyway, that's another conversation. If you would like to have a glass of wine with me afterwards, I'm happy to tell you a little bit about Toscana. But anyway, back to Nikhil. So I dipped into his hard drive, and I had to kind of shelve a lot of things. But I came to the performances, and one thing that I've noticed that he has done, or that one thing kind of struck me in the past 10 years of his kind of making performances, is that, and I've said this to him 1,000 times, is my friend Nikhil, I think you created a monster. You know, it's you know, there is a point where, you know, you are in control of what you do. You decide for yourself of what you want to make of your life, but ultimately you don't know if you are making it or if it's making you. So that place where, you know, your life in a way goes out of control and becomes something else is the monster I think we all create. In a way, our lives is a kind of exquisite corpse of many experiences, many interactions that become the personality and that become the choices that we are and the people we become. I think each one of you is a monster. Get in touch with it, and maybe you'll have a good time as well. I kind of started to look at the pictures of those moments in the performance where Nikhil is resting or is seeming to be exhausted from this laborious act of making. And we see him lying in a kind of exhausted, helpless, almost dead-like position. And in a way, the presence of death in a live performance is something that is of quite a bit of interest to him, because it is, in a way, what happens when a live performance is it recognizes the death present in every passing moment, or the death present in the idea of the now. That now it dies as now passes. So, in a way, what happens in the long durational performances is that because it's not possible to be running around like a baboon for about 50 hours, that it's important to rest, it's important to lie down, it's important to eat, it's important to sleep. It's important at some level to be comfortable so that you're able to carry out the act that you have given yourself to do, and to come out of it on the other side unscathed. Because if you had broken your leg or had to be amputated because of a performance, then I would consider that not a very successful performance. Because ultimately it is your body that has to carry the story, it is your body that has to carry the idea. So this is a performance, it's a series of performances called Broken White. Of course, Chopra is also playing constantly with the idea of black and white and the connotations of black and white. It is also the material of drawing because he's very interested in charcoal, which has a kind of blackness to it, a kind of dustiness to it. It sits on the skin when he's making large drawings, and as a result of performing, he gets blackened and whitens as a result of washing. This is a performance he does in Poland, in the Zachęta National Museum. The entire costume is made out of paper. It's extremely fragile. Costuming is an extremely important aspect of what he does, because it's important for him to transform himself out and step outside of his comfortable, everyday sense of self. If he is wanting to transform you as an audience, the first thing he has to do is transform himself. So, but also transform relationships in a sense with materials, and performance does that. For example, the paper that is used to draw on is now the paper that makes the costume. If he moves very slowly, also the paper starts to tear. And so the chocolate that you see that is being smeared all over his body is transformed from this luxurious, luscious, beautiful, yummy, I think women love chocolate, to eat. He sort of uses it in a kind of very expressive, very expressionistic way to kind of blacken his body. But also the kind of politics around the material, of course, are very much implicated into the performance work. So what we see him sort of smear the chocolate not just on himself, but also on this large piece of paper that sits at the bottom of the staircase that he moved extremely slowly across. And then he starts to, with a spoon, draw out what he sees, the staircase from which he has descended. Of course, art history and, the idea of the body descending the staircase, the nude descending the staircase, these are very much kind of conscious decisions to kind of evoke art history. Is it loud? Am I loud enough for everyone?
Yeah.
Yes. So after he smeared himself with chocolate, he decides to pour delicious, very thick cream all over himself, in a way taking a material that is associated with beauty, and in a way turning into a monster in a sense. A lot of these acts that are done are not rehearsed. He goes out there, he has a kind of blueprint of an idea of what he has to do, and then allows the moment to spontaneously create the piece. There is no way to rehearse them, because it is the presence of the audience as well that is completing the cycle of looking and being looked at. and they're gazing and being gazed at. So in a way, it's almost impossible to rehearse these performances. This was also the year that he was in Berlin. He was invited. In fact, we met a couple of times when he was in Berlin. It was very easy for me to go from Italy to Berlin. It's a simple journey. And what I noticed that Berlin, in a sense, did something quite bizarre for his mind. It was part of a fellowship where he was invited by the university to be doing research on performance as a performer, to be thinking about art practice as a form of research as well. So all you studio people, when you are in your studios and you're making the painting or you're making the sculpture, you're doing research. Yeah, this is something that is wonderful to discover for an artist. It's like, oh my God, you mean I don't have to sit with these many books to be kind of validating research? I think that it's very important that you consider what you do in your studios as research as well. But what it did to him this time, and the city of Berlin, which is like pulsating with artists, with millions of people screaming their art out, whether it's music or dance or movement, performance art, it's a very, very active scene. And of course the history of Germany and the history of Berlin is very much something that I think a lot of artists are very, very conscious about. So this idea of becoming an expressionist in a way happens in Germany for him, where he takes a studio space on rent and uses that studio space to make performances and experiments with. And this is the first time he's ever had a studio space in which he's making performances. And this was possible because the studio was on the street. It was overlooking the people passing by. So anytime he would enter the studio, it would be a performance. So he was able not just to do performances and experiment with his own ideas, but he was able to invite collaborators and people that kind of pushed him to kind of take his ideas on the edge. I call it kicked his ass, actually. And that allowed for some things to rupture. For this idea of always having to look beautiful was now challenged. And in a sense, the monster that comes around in a large way from his time in Berlin, or at least recognizing the monster that lies within the self. So here, what he does is, for the first time, after he has spent his years in Berlin, he moves back to Goa, or moves to Goa rather, because he was in Bombay before. I think he got quite used to the party scene in Berlin. The idea of having a scene was sort of important, not to party himself, but just the idea of that culture to exist around and to be making art in that environment seems very, very actually productive. So here he's making a drawing in a small gallery that he's been invited by in Goa. So it's very important that where he lives, he uses as well as a studio space, as an exhibition space. So we see that his first time taking a material like a lipstick that is associated with accentuating the mouth, with the symbol of beauty, with the symbol of health, with the symbol of feminism. So in a sense, he wants to take that material and transform it. So it extends from his mouth onto the walls and starts to become the material with which he makes the drawing. Now, interesting about the chocolate. The chocolate, of course, is very good for your skin. So if ever anyone decides to do performance with chocolate, you will be glowing after the performance. But you know, so the material has its own evocation. Now, like this room, for example, after it was covered with about 500 cases of lipstick, was smelling like that auntie that you've been kissing since you were a child, or the girlfriend that you first kissed. So maybe it's sort of, or the mama that you know that was always hugging you. So there are all of these evocations that happen with the material, which happen as a result of the performance. I mean, there is a way to preempt it, but you know, to use 600 lipstick in a rehearsal is really not possible, and a really big mess to clean up as well afterwards. The idea of kind of becoming the picture, becoming the object, is an important one, which is why, you know, at the end of the performances, there is a large kind of pose that Nikhil strikes, in a sense reminding us of portrait photography, in a way where these performances, these drawing performances start is in a, if you look at the history of early studio portrait photography, for example, or even you know, portraiture, or the discipline of portraiture, you know, you have the figure in the foreground and the landscape in the background, or the projected fantasy in the background. I remember visiting in India and going to some of these photo studios, and you would have like wallpapers of tulips in Holland, for example, and you know, the family be posing in front of it from the village in India with absolutely no context for the tulips of Holland. But it's the idea of this projected fantasy to place yourself in this idyllic landscape. So in this case, what the subject that is being pictured or made a picture of is making the landscape, is creating the fantasy that he wants or she wants to place himself or herself in. This is a project that happens in Paris. It is the first of the La Perla Negra or La Perle Noire series. In a sense, what happens in Goa, or this is what I think, the denial of the fact that there is a rehearsal needed for a performance is a funny one, because each performance is a rehearsal for the next one. What he takes ideas, or he throws himself against a set of unknowns, and he allows for those unknowns to be discovered, and then he takes these discoveries into the next performance. So each performance, in a sense, is a culmination of all the performances he has done before, in a way. So there are a couple of things. One of the things that he's also interested in, besides the idea of being the painter, being the subject. One of the things that he's interested in is identity, and I guess this is something that you see that occurs in every performance. It's a completely new persona. It is a completely new construction. It is always, in many ways, taken from the site that he's performing in. In this case, this is La Marais in Paris, which is where the jewelry district of Paris. It's also where some of the great dukes and duchesses, and you know, I wouldn't say great, but you know, a stiff upper lip kind of people have their posh houses and apartments there as well. So it is also the art gallery district. So he starts the performance with about 20,000 fake Chinese pearls, and he takes the bucket of that and throws it up in the air, and for a split second everything freezes, or almost seems to freeze, when the pearls go up in the sky, and then they seem to stop there, and then they all fall together like a kind of feeling of magic in a way. So so one of the clues that he gets when he's in Paris is that he visits the Grand Palais, which is a big exhibition hall, and the exhibition of Cartier is going on. And one of the things he's struck by is the Patiala necklace. This was a necklace designed for the Maharaja by Cartier, the Maharaja of Punjab, the Maharaja of Patiala. And in a way, it's a kind of reversal of colonialism. In the 20s, the Maharaja went on a boat with a trunk full of jewels and said to Cartier, make something for me. And the Cartier was shaking in the boots because, you know, there was this entire legacy of Indian design, and his own sensibilities had to be woven together in an interesting way. Of course, he comes up with an exquisite necklace, and the Maharaja says, oh, it's good, I like it. So there is a kind of return of arrogance that is projected by the Maharaja. Of course, there are a series of stories in the way in which the Maharaja breaks the notion of white supremacy that was very dominant in those days. So here's what he wants to do with identity. In a way, he plays out the part of, let's say, the Maharaja. He creates, in a sense, the seascape that perhaps the Maharaja saw on his way to Parigi. He carries with him thousands of little pieces of jewel. These are all fake, of course, because this is a performance. But it replicates a sense of desire to take Parigi, the backdrop of a city which is the cultural hotbed of the world, or used to be, and sort of imprisons himself in this space, drawing with lipstick, again with about, I think, 1,000 cases of lipstick, a drawing of the sea in the middle of a storm. So, and as he draws, he sticks pearls and jewels and embellishes a costume that he has brought with him, as if he were going to be getting ready to show himself to Cartier in the most flamboyant, in the most decadent manner that ever could be, to show that India was a force to reckon with, to show that the culture of North India and Punjab was something to reckon with. But while he's doing the embellishment, you can see that he's smearing his white costume and staining it as well as he's going. But it is not just that he's staining himself, it is his costume, but he's also kind of blackening and whitening himself as he goes through the piece. So these acts of transformation are important. Why? Is because he creates the identity. He creates, in a sense, the stereotype of what one would assume to be Indian, what one would assume to be masculine, what one would assume to be urban, what would assume to be educated, what one would assume to be contemporary, what one would assume to be theater. He takes those stereotypes and uses the act of performance to break them constantly. And as he breaks one, in a sense, another stereotype is created, or another set of symbols are pushed out there for the audience to read. And there he lies there like a piece of meat at the end of the performance, in a sense, drowning in his own lipstick, drowning, in a sense, in his own drawing, never reaching Paris, never meeting Cartier, but being consumed, in a sense, by the ocean and by his own drawing. This is a performance. I think this is the last one, the last piece that I'm going to show you. It's a piece called Give Me Your Blood. Oh no, I have one more after this, I'm sorry. It's a video. I think it's important at some point to look at some video as well of the performance, even though I think that the video performances that I've seen of his are deathly boring, because they are so long. I mean, I died watching a 25-minute clip of him walking from one end of the room to the other. And like, what are you doing to me? Judge Calore, move faster. So anyway, the good thing is that we have the luxury of editing. And so, you know, I did a little cutting of some of the stuff that was a little too long. What I'm going to do is I'm going to jump, in a sense, from the visual art world for a second and insert ourselves into the world of the theatre. What's interesting is, for me, is that his practice, in a sense, sits in between, of course, the arts, you know, between photography, in between video, in between sculpture, in between performance art, but also there is a way to read the work from the lens of the theatre. So he does get invited into theatre festivals. So this is a 60-hour performance that is done in a theatre using the infrastructure that the theatre has. In this case, this is the Singapore International Festival for the Arts. The title of the performance is Give Me Your Blood and I Will Give You Freedom. I think it's a disgusting thing to say to anybody, but it is something that Subhash Chandra Bose, one of the freedom fighters, the so-called freedom fighters of India, said to people to recruit them in a sort of a, seems to me slightly fascistic. So he kind of takes that line, and Subhash Chandra Bose, this freedom fighter of India, was very active in Singapore, recruiting people for the Indian nationalist army to fight against the Allies, to align themselves actually with the Japanese and with the Nazis. It's a slightly crazy idea. But what we see around us first is the video projections. It's 360 degrees of video. It starts with a very serene landscape of beautiful coconut trees, paddy fields, lush tropical bananas. And what he uses is he uses Chinese ink in a way to draw on top of the video projection in a kind of calligraphic or in a kind of Chinese landscape painter-like way. He uses a brush. But there's, of course, also sound that plays an important element with the video. So you have, the sound of the birds playing along with the sound, with the video of this glorious landscape of the tropics. But that sound is broken by the sound of sirens, so very kind of reminiscent of the sort of World War II. And of course, there are damsel who got drunk the previous night. I don't know if you noticed her with a glass of wine, making a complete mess of herself. Incorrigible. I thought it was obnoxious for her to be drinking so much in public, to make her even overboard. A little hangover, I think, the next day, but some Alka-Seltzer, I think, so. But anyway, so the scene of tranquility turns into a scene of war, and what was once a beautiful landscape starts to turn into a war zone, as tanks roll in, as planes fly in, as the sounds of chains and guns and metal can be heard. We see him riding around in a bicycle. In a way, the Japanese arrived in Singapore on bicycles from Japan. Did you believe that? It's only the Japanese can do that. So cross country they came and they took over Singapore. It goes from serene to almost atomic to massive explosions happening on the screen in front. So in a way, it's besides, of course, the theatre. I mean, one is also, of course, reminded of cinema. and its relationship to sort of the idea of the narrative and the telling of the story. So in a way, what happens with most of the performances is that the audience is quite challenged. In a sense, they don't ever know how close to come. In fact, it comes to a point where each person in the audience determines how close they come to the performance. And that sets the tone for everybody. So the scene of war ends with rain, with a storm. The fire, in a way, is put out by water. The ocean takes over the space. The deluge is now taking over. He starts to take black duct tape and create on the floor a spider's web. A spider's web, in case you don't know, is a marvel in engineering. Because it has so many little points of contact that the weight is distributed over hundreds of little points. He cuts the paper that he has also been drawing on, which has been sitting on the floor for the past so many days, and sticks his head out like some sort of wild, I don't know, beast, sticking his tongue out at the audience. And that was the end of that performance piece. And what you see around you is this kind of really dark, kind of very strange, kind of post-apocalyptic, kind of futuristic landscape being projected. Call on cotton. Okay, we play without sound for a little while. At least you see the body moving through the space. In a way, you'll understand why the video can sometimes be deathly boring. So this was a piece that he does in Manchester. I don't know if you know, but I think our friend Achal has made it quite clear that India was very much a part of the British Empire. And in a way, a lot of Nikhil's work deals with a colonial history. I think he's very aware of the fact that English actually is his first language, and in a way it was more important to be English than it was to be Indian. It was more important to be sitting at the table with a fork and knife and a napkin on the lap than to be sitting on the floor eating rice with the fingers. So these questions, I think in a way it's kind of sickening that in Italy it's very important that we spoke Italian before we speak any other language. But in some sort of way there is a kind of classist attitude of a lot of people in India who want to only impart a certain kind of culture in their people that is exclusive of what is really truly Indian. Or is the fact that English is the first language of this person as Indian as Hindi is? Perhaps it is. So these questions about identity, of course, pop up a lot. But here he took the relationship of Manchester with Mumbai, the city that he's lived in for many, many years, and it became quite interesting in terms of the relationship between these two cities, largely based on the trade and the manufacturing of cotton. Manchester was the birthplace of industrialization and the Industrial Revolution, and Bombay then becomes, in a sense, the duck. After, in a sense, Britain exhausts its coal mines, shifts its manufacturing to India. In a way, this is a reflection as well of capitalism and neo-capitalism, where the manufacturing, in a sense, happens somewhere else, where the rivers and the ground and the water gets polluted and the air gets polluted somewhere else. So, in a way, Manchester was a city that had black skies, literally, because it was that polluted. I would imagine millions of people dying of cancer. Of course, we don't know that anymore because there was no technology at the time to discover that. So he drags, like a laborer, like a coolie, 600 kilos, 800 meters of cotton fabric across the museum. Now, this is interesting to note that this museum is a landscape. It collects landscape drawings and paintings. That's this museum's obsession. It has the largest collection of landscape, classical landscape paintings of Turner and Constable, one of the greatest landscape painters of Britain. So, in a way, the idea of dragging this cotton across the landscape becomes quite an important preoccupation, right? Like kind of the shifting and the moving landscape, the laborer as he's tilling the soil to grow the cotton. Now, the Whitworth Gallery, where this is happening, has invited this man to have an exhibition in a half-constructed site. They thought it would be interesting to give a construction site to an Indian artist. Oh, it was wonderful, I have to say, that a museum of a museum of classical arts would be always wanting to do collaborative work with contemporary artists. And because this was going to be a pause in the construction of the building, he thought it was important to recognize the real workers who are actually doing the construction work by serving them a cup of tea at tea time. So this tent is built in India. This tent is made with cotton. This tent is made with cotton that is grown and manufactured in India. The clothes that he is wearing, and you will notice a costume designer credit in every slide presentation, before any slide comes up, before any project comes up, because the role of the costume designer is actually a very important one. I think making clothes is a very specific science, and to know how fabric falls on the body is a very specific skill and a very specific talent. And it also allows the objectivity of another person looking at the body and saying, this is a good silhouette, you're looking like a fruitcake. It's important to have that distance. So the costumes that Nikhil is wearing, and you can see that now he's gone from what started off as a farmer to now he is a kind of mill worker, toiling in the sort of Manchester landscape. So what you see him drawing is from references of what Manchester looks like today from outside of the city. He draws directly on top of the cotton in a way, writing or rewriting the history of our relationship with cotton and coal. Coal becomes a kind of metaphor, or the charcoal in a sense becomes a metaphor for the coal that is used to drive the Industrial Revolution. It has become what makes the steam engines, what creates the industry, and all the wars that we fight today as well are based on non-renewable energy sources. So in a way, what he does is he rewrites the history of performance, of the... Here she is. It's brilliant. So by drawing stacks of chimney smoke coming out of Manchester's skyline, he kind of repollutes the air to the drawing of Manchester. But what he draws alongside Manchester is Mumbai, the city that is, and what it looks like today, the high-rises, the defunct mills. In fact, the mill culture in some way kind of made Bombay or Mumbai and destroyed it. The worker unions went on strike and that killed the industry completely. So he draws Mumbai kind of like the slum that is enclosing itself into Manchester. In a way, also the obvious presence of South Asians in the United Kingdom. And now you see him in the third avatar, which is the mill worker, not the mill worker, but the mill owner, where he's ordering around the men. He's ripping the canvas into two. He's cutting it, and he doesn't lift a thing, not even his little finger, or maybe his little finger. So we drag this slowly out. All right, come on. Because there's so much of fabric on that side, how are you going to... Eating! Lots of food in the face of the worker. You know, I think he comes from a culture that is sadly not, when the youth movement so there is I think this idea, the irony is kind of important in the work. But also, you know, India is not a place for hunts. It's not a place for culture. And in a way, there is some, and I see this in his eyes. There is a kind of, behind this kind of mask, being this boy, there is a out of convention conventional notions.
He doesn't like that.
So thank you very much for your ears. So I'm happy to take questions. I would like to announce that if you're expecting to see Nikhil tomorrow in the performance, I'm sorry to disappoint you. It's going to be Michelle instead tomorrow. But you should still come. I think she can do quite a good job. But if you have any questions, please ask. I'll be happy to answer and try to on his behalf. Yes.
When you say that he is a researcher,
Yes.
when you say that he is a researcher as an artist, I was hoping you could elaborate what that means to be an artistic researcher.
I think that, academia, in a sense, imposes or has imposed. Maybe this academia is different, I don't know. But I think there is this idea of the library being, in a sense, this kind of a temple, which it is. Books being extremely important in terms of information. I think there are exploring textual information, printed information, libraries and studying and regurgitating what we have studied is one kind of research. But spending time in your studio, let's say if you're an oil painter, for example, working out the subtleties in the way in which the colors shift, or working out in a way how the leaves of the poplar tree sit on the tree, or understanding in a way how to create force in your line. I think these are also research. This is also part of knowledge, and that knowledge is written and documented in art. If I was to look at a Jan van Eyck painting, or if I was to look at a Rembrandt drawing, even today, I can feel the presence of the artist on the piece of paper. I read the technique in the way in which it sits on a piece of paper, and that's the research that I think is equally important for an artist as much as reading. So I think the work we do in our studios as artists is research. Maybe I'm wrong, but maybe somebody else thinks differently. See?
Which brand of lipstick did he use at the power show? Which brand of lipstick did he use?
Which brand of
Which brand of lipstick?
Oh, the cheapest. I mean, it is probably so bad for you. I mean, I just hope it's not full of whale blubber, that's all. Cosmetics.
I would love to hear about the arrival of the performance in the mind before arriving to the physical performance.
Well, I think what is important is it's important to come into contact, into live physical contact with the place that one is going to perform in, to some extent before the performance, because in a way, the conversations that happen, the sites that one visits, the air that one breathes, the way in which one experiences the light, and I think are important clues. So, in Nikhil will often go to a site before a performance, well before a performance. In the case of Montreal, he visited 2 years ago. So in a sense, their ideas about what he's going to do are already been brewing in his head for the past 2 years. It's also, in a sense, like I said about that is a performance, a rehearsal for the next one. So besides, of course, the ideas that he comes to with visiting a place, it's also about where he is going in his own research, with his own performance work. So in terms of, let's say, Montreal, he's at this point working with this new persona, or this persona that he's been preoccupied with for the past year and a half, which is this La Perla Negra. So this character becomes the framework. Montreal becomes another kind of framework that will collide in real time in the performance. So there is only that much that can be thought about. There is only that much that can be planned, and the rest is, hallelujah. Will all come together. I don't know. I answered your question.
Yes, but I'm thinking about also, now I'm thinking about the materials. In the case of the cotton, it's evident for me the site specificity of that material. I can imagine it surfacing. And I wonder if there's other ways in which materials surface to that process.
Absolutely. I mean, I think if you just take he wants to be very conscious of all the materials that become part of the work. I mean, it's as important as, every single grain is important to an installation artist. I think that everything that he touches and he uses in performance twists, plays, transforms, has a very specific or has a bunch of meanings. So it's very interesting in what those meanings may be. For example, cotton is not just exclusive to the relationship between Manchester and India. Today, each and every human being sitting inside this auditorium has some cotton on their body right now. So it's a microcosm sometimes. An idea is a microcosm for a larger dialogue or for a larger conversation. But he's very interested in a kind of Foucaultian way, if you want to think about it theoretically, is how the signifiers are set up, and then how the gestalt of the performance, in a sense, creates the meaning that then gets transferred onto you, in part maybe, and then a part to you, and then a part to you, and then you three have a conversation, and then so it's not one thing, or it's not a plan to make, or it's not one material, like charcoal has its own hundreds of meanings, it's wood, it's ash, it's dust. He does think of his body being cremated at the end of his life, for example, because all his family has been, for generations, it's a kind of tradition. So at the end, everything will become burnt ash, black. So there are all these relationships with material that he brings into the performances. See?
I had a chance to meet Nikhil. He's a nice guy.
Yeah. Sometimes.
I was wondering. I noticed in some of the early pictures, he had some beards in the looking like. I was wondering if those he was using those as sort of aids with the kind of develop the character, but kind of maybe it kind of comes from the costume, like sort of seeing it in the mirror and kind of develops like that.
Yeah. I think the mirror plays, again, it's a kind of continuation from what you were asking about the presence of objects and material in the work. And I think the mirror is an important one because, I mean, I think there is so much about us as human beings that stems from our relationship with our own reflection. It's the kind of narcissist complex that we all have, you know, of us looking at ourselves for the first time in a pool of water and still, you know, kind of wanting to idolize ourselves and wanting to create ourselves in the image of what we think is beautiful, which is why I think 90% of the men shave. You don't, those who don't. But you know, it's the idea of wanting for men to bring out their jawline and a certain amount of femininity is because it's a I think it's a projection of our own desire onto ourselves. And you know, I think in fact, if you notice where we hide the mirrors, you know, we try to fool ourselves by saying, we put the mirror in the bathroom. But that's where we really look at ourselves when we are alone and there is nobody and the door is shut and you're confronted by the most hideous self. In the morning, the brush your teeth is not so beautiful. But, you know, and so that's the base canvas that you start your day with. And then you apply your life onto that face. So the mirror plays actually a very important part in our life, in the way in which we make ourselves. But in the performance, I think it also alludes, in a sense, to another world, maybe the world of illusion, the world of fantasy, the world of desire. And in a sense, what it does for an artist is to say, well, this is a performance, this is my opinion, this is my expression, but at the end of the day, as the maker of culture, it is a mirror back onto you as an audience. The process of performance, in a way, is a mirror to life. So I'm hoping that, you know, I'm hoping that we can read many things into these objects, and the mirror is important. See?
So I'm seeing in a lot of the work, there's like more traditional 2D forms, like some really beautiful drawings, and I think almost all of the performances. So I'm wondering about that relationship between performance and a much newer style and something as classical as like a landscape drawing, how those two things coexist.
Very simply, he's been trained as a painter. He's been trained quite traditionally as a painter. Not in the tradition of Indian tradition, but in the tradition of Western art history. His grandfather was a landscape painter, and in a sense that becomes a good clue for him to enter his own practice. Is to understand landscape painting and how and what the role of landscape painting is. That it becomes this window, this ideal window through which you look out into eternity. If you look at the sky and you look at the clouds, you're looking forever. So it's also like magic, right? Like pulling a rabbit out of a hat to say, here's a flat wall. Now I'm going to make one line across this flat wall. And suddenly you see space. Suddenly you see the sky and you see the ocean by just one line. And it's truly the magic of the human imagination. And in a sense, a wonderful legacy of images that some fantastic painters have left for us. The landscape painting is also, in a sense, it's funny that you're going from your question to your question to your question. It's because it goes from, what was it? What was that? From mirrors to landscape painting. In a sense, the landscapes are generally speaking of what sees. So in a way, the landscape is the landscape painting in a sense is also a mirror. But also as a performance, he kind of asks himself the question. He says, I think he's quite daunted by the idea of a performance. It's not an easy task. So he goes to himself and says, oh my God, there are going to be 500 people coming to this event, and I better be using every single skill that I have and put it out there. Of course, that's the initial idea. But then as performances go on, there is the idea of editing and kind of polishing, kind of honing in on what it is that one wants to focus on with the performance. But creating this illusion of space on a flat surface is definitely the magic that he's interested in evoking.
Is it problematic for him that the viewer can't really be present for the whole experience, but yet you still need that length of time to be able to follow through the idea that he's trying to convey? Or, I mean, how long do viewers usually stay?
It's a great question. It is absolutely impossible, almost impossible, for an audience member to see an entire performance. It's almost never happened. But it is important, I guess, for an audience to have not just one brushing interaction with the performance, but to perhaps engage with it a couple of times, because what that does is it allows you to understand perhaps what has happened in between. So there is also a way to imagine what has happened in a performance. If you saw it like at one moment and then you see it in another moment, and you go, what happened here, you know? And then you ask questions, and then you build the story, and the narrative gets complete. And that's okay. But different contexts create different kind of audience attention spans. A visual arts space, an audience will come with the attention span of a fruit fly. You know, how much time you spend in front of an artwork. It's quite simple. 3 minutes, 4 minutes. If you spend 5 minutes, you're doing research. But if you go to a theater festival and you go to the theater, you are ready to see a 3-hour production, no problem. You sit on the bench, you watch. So different contexts create different attention spans. Let's see.
How does the audience react to these performances? Like, how close have they come to the artist, or to actually, for example, pick up the material like lipstick and actually get involved as well? Does that ever happen, or did the artist ever allow that?
There is a point, I think it's going back to the idea of the performance being the monster that you create. Once you create the beast, you let the beast go. And the audience is creating the performance as much as the performance is creating the performance. The presence, you, everyone over here, is creating this lecture as much as I'm creating this lecture. If you are not here, this lecture is not happening. So, the role of the audience is a very important one. Now, what is the role of the audience in a space that has no fourth wall like the theater does, or does not have perhaps the rules and regulations of the museum? How does one create that distance? There are some tools that he uses, which is not to engage with the audience. You believe that he is not going to be taking questions in the middle of a performance, right? Because he's not going to be offering so much power to the audience. But the desire in the performer or the artist to see a performance through is also exchanged with the desire in the audience to see the performance through. So everybody over here who don't want to see this lecture through, for example, have left. Those that do want to see the lecture through are here and they want to see it through. And if you decide to come up onto stage and hold me by my collar and have me sit down and drag me out of here, there would be maybe some of you that would protest. Other than, or maybe not. I don't know. But the audience takes responsibility. If somebody was to come and touch him in the middle of the performance, there would be 3 other people saying, "Get your dirty hands off the man." And so, because it's important for the audience to see the piece through as well.
I have a question about his relationships with the Western culture. It seems like he's quite integrated into the Western world, and I wonder how does that affect his relationships with Indian culture and his original self?
Sorry, I mean, it's not to be taken personally, but have you been to India?
Yes.
There are many Indias, right? There is the India of the village. I mean, primarily there are 2 Indias, right, you could say. There is the India of the city, and then there is the India of the village. And they're very different Indias. And if you take the India of the city, and if you take a city like Mumbai, for example, and you enter a certain kind of socio-political economic class of people who have been educated, you will find them at par with, or not at par, I should say. It's not about up or down, but it is about being able to create relationships and have conversations cross-culturally. I think that India today is extremely international. A certain part of that India is very, very international. I mean, I visited him in Goa. I mean, Goa, for God's sake, is the trans capital of the world. You know, I mean, is it Indian? Yes, it's Indian. Is speaking English Indian? Yes, it's Indian. Is wearing a shirt and a pair of trousers Indian? Yes, it's Indian. I'm sorry it doesn't fit everybody's ideal of what an Indian should be. But it is Indian, all the same. You know, we are a very globalized world. I mean, it's, does he drink Coca-Cola? Never. Never. Does he eat the McDonald's hamburger? Never. Because I think that the definition of what is international is the ability to decide, to make choices. And I think that the people in India is as empowered in many ways as the people in Canada. See.
So he has every piece that he does as a performance, he has an end piece as like a painting and drawing, then he exhibits in a museum. Does he sell this work? And how does he get funding for this? Because the canvas is huge, so I'm guessing he proposes.
It's the hardest thing in the world to sell. I mean, because they're large installations, of course they're for sale, and he's got galleries, commercial galleries. He in a way, the photographs of some of the performances, he's always working with a professional photographer. As you can see, the quality of some of his photographs are pretty good. So they're print-worthy, some of them. So sometimes he's making the prints, limited edition prints of his work. I think it's very important for an artist to think about what is their currency, because you can survive to some extent on grants and awards, but I think it's very empowering for an artist to be able to fund themselves with their own talent, with their own practice. So everything is always, in a sense, as objects for sale. The live moment can never be for sale. But what comes out of the live moment is artwork created as a result of a performance. Now, have they entered collections? Yes, some of them, but I would not say that this is something that is consistent, you know. And the market and the way in which it works and fluctuates is so different from what goes on in an artist's studio. They're almost completely disconnected. So he survives partly on sales of some work and partly on invitations like this one to come here and make work and get commissioned. So it's a juggling act, a big one. It's one of a lot of trauma and very stressful. It's money. The problem is the money. There is no escape from it, and it stinks. So it is a problem, I would say. Yes.
Why does he choose the gazebo in Berry Park for his performance?
Well, in a way, he loves public spaces. He loves to catch audience completely unaware of what is going on. And he likes the audience that knows what is going on to explain to the audience that is not knowing what is going on, what is going on. So there is a public space really is a big challenge. I think public space in Montreal is beautiful. I think one of your biggest assets as a city is that you have so much greenery and so many parks and gardens for you to be able to enjoy. And in a sense, it is a recognition of the fact that there are these open spaces in an urban center. So, and in a way, a hard act, not a hard act, a somewhat hard act of a 57-hour, 60-hour performance that he's going to undertake is kind of juxtaposed against this beautiful sunshine and this beautiful blue sky, and families coming and picnicking and bringing their children and running around, and people playing and rollerblading. You know, and in that there is this guy who is struggling to make a drawing out of lipstick. So there is that juxtapositioning of this idea of a performance that seems quite vulnerable in a sense in public space. I think Canada, I think Montreal would be quite receptive to a public art performance. So it's worth a try.
Is it a deliberate choice to go to the Gibson Gorge Valley Park with its association to park extension and largest
It's definitely the masala is there for sure. I can get the smell. I think it's quite perfect. That neighborhood is quite beautifully mixed. It's a lovely farmers market. And, there are many features about this area which are quite wonderful. Hopefully quite conducive to make a performance. If I don't start a ride, of course, if you don't start something, it's a problem, which it won't be. But this is I think, it could be quite interesting as a neighborhood. And maybe we can have, I can give this person a chance to ask, because you haven't asked the question, and because my throat is becoming like sandpaper, we can perhaps make this the last question, and then there is a vernissage. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay.
We were invited to go across the hall to get a vernissage afterwards. Nikhil's exhibition and two others as well.
Yeah. So,
maybe this is kind of fitting then, but we've heard an awful lot about Nikhil, and I want to hear more about Nico, right?
oh, you don't want to hear about
You just seem like very well versed in contemporary art.
it. The truth is that I'm an accountant in a very boring firm. Shitty little town like Poggibonsi. Do you know Poggibonsi? It's so boring. So my life is very boring. This is why I'm interested in art. Anywhere Nikhil is doing performance, I'm on plane and I go.